Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to today's weekend reflections on this, the very early hours of Sunday morning. Um, Happy New Year. It's the first time I've spoken to you since the New Year. I know some people might say, well, it's not our New Year because that's, in the Hijri calendar, but still, I mean, it is a new solar year. It is when a lot of people count the beginning of the year, and these are just different. It's but Today, what I'd like to read to you is something from this little book. This is by Imam Al-Ghazali. Imam Al-Ghazali famously wrote a book called the Ihya Ulum Al-Din. Ihya Ulum Al-Din is one of those really great scholarly works that many ulama have said, even if we lost many other books in Islam, even if many of our books got lost or destroyed, but the Ihya survived, we would still have Islam. It would still be preserved. It's such a scholarly and reliable book that's respected by Muslims across the board, um, certainly within the Sunni Islam. But it's a big book. It's a multi-volume work. So Imam Al-Ghazali obviously realized this, that such large books are not going to be widely read by general people. It was also originally written in Arabic. So Ghazali wrote this book, The Alchemy of Happiness, which is a summary of some essential points that he makes within the Ihya. And yet this is only a small book, this being an English translation of it. And I'm going to read from, this one, the translation is it's a bit old, so I will modernize certain things as I read it. I will explain it in more modern English if people get confused. This was first published in 1909, and it was republished in 2008 by Forgotten Books. The translator is, I've just read his name. Uh, 1 minute. The translation is by someone called Cloud Field, or Claude. That'd be Claude, wouldn't it? Claud, Claude Field. So he was probably an Orientalist, 100 years ago, but he translated this work. And I think I'll actually read his preface because it's interesting. Because he's coming from a whole different perspective. So I'll read the preface and then I'll skip to the section I wanted to read, the knowledge of self. But this gives quite a good background to the book. Okay, the preface begins, Renan, whose easygoing mind was the exact antithesis to the intense earnestness of Ghazali, calls him the most original mind among Arabian philosophers. Works, it is true, are polemics against the philosophers, especially is Tehafut al-Falasifa, or the destruction of the philosopher. And as Solomon Monk says in his Mélange de philosophie juive et arabe, Ghazali dealt a fateful blow to Arabian philosophy in the East, from which it never recovered, though it revived a while in Spain and culminated. And thenceforth, what Browning says of the French poet, when he gentilhomme, was true of him. But he was too noble a character to concentrate himself entirely on his own soul and its eternal prospects. The requests of his children and other family affairs, of which have no exact information, caused him to return home. Besides this, the continued Ismailis, connected with the famous assassins, and of irreligious doctrines, and increasing religious indifference to the masses, not only filled Ghazali and his Sufi friends with a profound grief, but determined them to stem the evil with the whole force of their philosophy, the ardor of vital conviction, and the authority of noble example. So you see, the production of the Ihya Ulum Al-Din, it came out of this environment. So Ghazali had actually initially retired as a, not a theologian, but jurist. It's the English. He retired from that. There was something missing, and he was skeptical about the Sufis because he'd heard things like people do today, probably similar things that people were saying, and also he'd seen some people who had gone crazy and were calling themselves Sufis, and none of that, you know, none of that. It doesn't ignite you and lift you up. Or looking out into the cosmos, it does give them a sense of awe. Even people who are atheists have experienced this. But knowledge can be very dry if it's just studied for, you know, right, this is wrong, this is right, this is a system of understanding a religion. You know? It's basically like a study of law. And he was quite well renowned, but he's also starting to feel like something wrong with this. He's there speaking to people, but he was speaking about things which he hadn't experienced in his heart. And that troubled him. Interestingly, it's one of the same things that drove me to Islam and also into Sufism, because I needed to experience something. I needed to feel something that was real. I was after what in English is called gnosis or mysticism. It's one thing to know things on paper, things in the Quran or in Hadith, or even what the scholars have said, but quite another to experience. In his autobiography, referred to above, Ghazali tells us that after emerging from a state of pyrrhic skepticism, he had finally arrived at the conclusion that the mystics were on the right path and the true arifin, or knowers of God. But in saying this, he meant those Sufis whose mysticism did not carry them into extravagant utterances like that of Mansur Khalaj, who was crucified at Baghdad in AD 922 for exclaiming, "I am the truth," or God. In his Ihya Ulum Al-Din, Ghazali says, the matter went so far that certain persons boasted of a union with the deity, and chat in his unveiled presence they beheld him, and enjoyed familiar conversations with him, saying, "Thus it was spoken to us, Sufi, on the common people. Some husbands farms run to waste, set up sanctions for themselves. For human nature is pleased with maxims like these, which permit one to neglect useful labor with the idea of acquiring spiritual purity, the attainment of certain mystical degrees and qualities. This notion is productive of great," was highlighting the foolishness of this, how people can be led astray by their delusions. delusions of spiritual purity or of attaining some kind of mystical degree. This is why all of the good sheikhs, they tell you, don't worry about these things. Don't look at these things. Look at your sins. Look at your weaknesses. And this is to remind us, because we're not angels. If we were angels, we'd be in the paradise with angels. We'd be in the presence of God all the time. We wouldn't be sinning. We wouldn't be making any mistakes. Yet, every single one of us here, both myself and everybody who's watching this, we all sin. We all make mistakes. That's the human condition. Even if we start to do better and we start to reduce our sins, we still sin and we still make mistakes until the day that we die. None of us are angels. But people can get, and this is also why we're taught to learn the Sharia and to practice Sufism, not simply to practice Sufism, not simply to practice mysticism and Gnosticism, but to ground it in something which is foundational, good sense. That's the idea of it. So we end up with a balance. We need two wings to fly, many of the Sufis say. So it's about finding that balance. For himself, Ghazali was a practical mystic. His aim was to make men better by leading them from a merely notional acquiescence in the stereotyped creed of Islam to real knowledge of God. The first 4 chapters of the on the famous verse in the Hadith, traditional sayings of Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he who knows himself knows God. He is especially scornful of the parrot-like repetition of orthodox phrases, thus alluding to the almost hourly use by Mohammedans of the phrase, I take refuge in God. A'udhu billah. Ghazali says in Ihya Ulum Al-Din, Shaitan laughs at such pious ejaculations. Those who utter them are like a man who should meet a lion in the desert, while there is a fort at no great distance. And when he sees the evil beast, should stand exclaiming, I take refuge in the fortress, without moving a step towards it. How would this profit him? It will not protect you from the terrors of his judgment unless you really take refuge in him. It is related to some unknown Sufi that when he asked for a definition of religious sincerity, he drew a red hot piece of iron out of a blacksmith's forge and said, behold, its red hot sincerity is certainly characteristic of Ghazali, and there is no wonder that he did not admire his contemporary Omar Khayyam. The little picture of the lion and sword in the above passage is a small instance of another conspicuous trait in Ghazali's mind, his turn for allegory. Emerson says, whoever thinks intently will find an image more or less luminous rise in his mind. In Ghazali's writings, many such images arise, some grotesque, some beautiful. His allegory of the soul as a fortress beleaguered by the armies of Shaitan is a striking anticipation of the holy war of Bunyan. The greatest of the Sufi poets, Jalaluddin Rumi, born a century after Ghazali's death in AD 1207, has paid him the compliment of incorporating these allegories, which occur in the Ihya in his own Masnawi. Such is the famous one of the Chinese and Greek artists, which runs as follows. Once upon a time, the Chinese, having challenged the Greeks to a trial of skill in painting, the Sultan summoned them both into the edifices built for the purpose directly facing each other, and commanded them to show proof of their art. The painters of the two nations immediately applied themselves with diligence to their work. The Chinese sought and obtained of the king every day a great quantity of colors, but the Greeks, not the, until with a clangor of immediately the king with his courtiers and they stood amazed at the wonderful splendor of the Chinese painting, the exquisite beauty of the colors. But meanwhile, the Greeks, who had not sought to adorn their walls with paints, but labored rather to erase every color, drew aside the veil which concealed their work. Then, wonderful to tell, manifold variety of Chinese colors was seen still more delicately and beautifully reflected from the walls of the Grecian temple as it stood illuminated rays of the midday sun. This powerful, of course, pure and calm spotted mirror. Similarly, the epilogue of the In the Dark it's been borrowed by Jalaluddin Rumi from Ghazali. Another characteristic of Ghazali which appeals to the modern mind is the way in which he expounds the religious argument from the probability, much as Bishop Butler and Browning do. He might have said with Blogram, with me, faith means perpetual unbelief, kept quiet like the snake neath Michael's foot, who stands calm just because he feels it writhe. That's the Angel Macau is referring to. This combination of ecstatic assurance and skepticism is one of those antinomies of the human mind which annoy the rationalist and rejoice the mystic. Those in whom they coexist are perpetual, and yet, how can he? Another point in which Ghazali anticipates Bishop Butler is his representation of punishment as the natural working out of the consequences, not an arbitrary inflection imposed ab extra. He tries to rationalize the lurid threatenings of the Quran. In his own day, Ghazali was accused of having one doctrine for the multitude and one for himself and his friends. Professor D.B. MacDonald of Hartford, after going thoroughly into the matter, says, the charge of a secret doctrine is to be proved against Ghazali. It must be on other and better evidence than that which is now before us. At any rate, Ghazali has been accepted as an orthodox authority by the Mohammedans, bearing in mind this was 1909, among whom he al-Islam, the proof of Islam. And it has been said of all the books of Islam, if all the books of Islam were destroyed, and it would be but a slight loss if only the Ihya of Ghazali was preserved. The great modern reformer of Islam in India, the late Sayyid Ahmed, has had some portions of his enormous work printed separately for the purpose of familiarizing the young Muslims of Aligarh with Ghazali. The Ihya was written in Arabic, and Ghazali himself wrote an abridgment of it in Persian for popular use, which he entitled Kimiyai Sadat, The Alchemy of Happiness. This little book contains 8 sections of that abridgment. Theologians are the best judges of theologians are the best judges. Dr. August Thullock's opinion of Ghazali. And this is interesting because this is coming from a Christian. This man, if ever any have deserved the name, was truly a divine, and he may be justly placed on the same level with Origen. So remarkable, well, Origen is a great Christian philosopher. So remarkable was he for learning and ingenuity. I think so. Maybe I'll just check. Origen. Yeah, Christian theologian. Upon Mohammedanism, i.e., Islam, so much in the form given them by him, they the Quran with so much piety and learning. In the form given them by him, they seem, in my opinion, worthy of the assent of Christians. Bearing in mind that's from a Christian perspective. They don't normally say that as scholars. whatsoever was most excellent in the philosophy of Aristotle. Nor Rumi, nor maybe Rumi is a poet. They think he's a poet. They don't realize he was a scholar as well. Probably the average Muslim doesn't realize Maulana Rumi was a scholar as well as a poet. In addition to Islamic scholars. And this is real scholars are respected as Christian. But Christian theology for a long time didn't make any sense to me, which is one of the reasons I embrace. But I've learned to respect Christian theology because I've read some of their theologians that really understand it rather than some. There's actually, in the introduction, says the alchemy may be briefly described as turning away from the world to God, and its constituents are four: the knowledge of self, the knowledge of God, the knowledge of this world as it really is, and the knowledge of the next world as it really is. And I want to read the first one. And it's interesting. Imam Al-Ghazali begins with the knowledge of self. A lot of imams and priests and people like this today, they begin with the knowledge of God. The Prophet Muhammad himself said that he who knows himself knows God. This was also repeated by that the truth may be manifest to them. No, now nothing is nearer to thee. How canst thou know anything else? Sayest, I know myself, meaning thy outward shape, body, face, limbs, and so forth. Such knowledge can never be a key to the knowledge of God. Nor if thy knowledge as to that which is within only extends so far that when thou art hungry, thou eatst, and when thou art angry, thou attackest someone. Wilt thou progress any further in this path? For the beasts are thy partners in this. So if when you say you know yourself, you only know that when you are hungry, you eat, angry, you attack someone, or how will you progress with this? But real self-knowledge consists in knowing the following things. I'm going to take out the arguments. What going and for what purpose earth for a while? All real happiness and misery consist. What is real happiness? What does that consist of? And what is misery as well? Some of your attributes are those of animals. Some are of devils, and some are of angels. And you have to find out which of these attributes are accidental and which is essential. Until you know this, you can find out where real happiness lies. Until you find out which of your attributes, which of your qualities are qualities that Imam Al-Ghazali says, that you won't be able to have real happiness. The occupation of animals is eating, sleeping, and fighting. Therefore, if you are an animal, busy yourself in those things. Eating, sleeping, and fighting. Busy in stirring up mischief and guile and deceit. If you belong to them, go and do that work. Angels contemplate the beauty of God and are entirely free from animal qualities. If you are of angelic nature, then strive towards your origin, that you may know and contemplate the Most High and be delivered from that condition of lust and anger. You should also discover why you have been created with these animal instincts, whether that you should subdue them and lead them captive, or whether you should subdue them and in whether they should subdue you, and lead you to be captive, subdue them, and in doing so, make of one make of those animalistic instincts your steed and your weapon. In other words, it's a beast. The animalistic side of you is a beast, just like a horse or a dog. Do you chase off and you're not in control, but the dog's in control? Or on the horse and you're not riding properly, you're being carried everywhere because you're not in control of the horse. Animals are very useful if you tame them and train them. A dog can lead a blind person across the road safely and keep them safe, but only after it's been trained. Then the dog becomes the eyes and the ears of the blind person. A horse, when it's properly trained, can take you for miles, take you all around, and it was basically the car of people. It could take you where you need to go and in much time. But only a trained horse can do that. A wild and you could break the body's an animal, not the whole of the human being, because we also have a mind and we also have a soul. But if we let the body get out of control, the body acts like an animal. This is what Imam Al-Ghazali is saying. If you tame it, then it becomes. Maulana Sheikh Nazim referred to the same thing, and he used to say, then that dragon will ride you to your success. But if you let the dragon take over you, it will destroy you. It's the same principle. The first step to self-knowledge is to know that you are composed of an outward shape called a body and an inward entity called the heart or soul. By heart, I do not mean this piece of flesh that's situated in our bodies. That's just the physical heart. But that which uses all the other faculties as its instruments and servants. It does not belong to the visible world, but to the invisible, and has come into this world as a traveler visits a foreign country for the sake of merchandise, and will presently return to its native land. It is the knowledge of this entity and its attributes, which is the key to the knowledge of God. So it's not your physical aspects, although we should be aware of that. That also is part of getting to, because what is your physical aspect. But don't mistake that. Is to understand your heart and your soul, that which is really focus or your instincts. Some idea of the reality of the heart or spirit may be obtained by a man closing his eyes and forgetting everything around except his individuality. And will, by doing so, obtain a glimpse of the unending nature of that individuality. Too close inquiry, however, into the essence of the spirit is forbidden by the law. In the Quran it is written, they will question you concerning the spirit. Say, the spirit comes by the command of my Lord. So much is known of it that it is an indivisible essence belonging to the world of decrees, and that it is not from everlasting, but created. An exact philosophical knowledge of the spirit is not a necessary preliminary to walking in the path of religion, but comes rather as a result of self-discipline and perseverance in that path. As it is said in the Quran, those who strive in our way, verily we will guide them to the right paths. So Imam Al-Ghazali here is not talking about understanding that you have a soul and that soul is the real you that is traveling in this body, in this world. It is a traveler. If you think I am just this physical, this is me, the physical world, this is why people become atheists. But even they, if they take a quiet moment out and reflect, they realize there's some more, but they don't know how to explain it. For the carrying on of this spiritual warfare, by which the knowledge of oneself and of God is to be obtained, the body may be figured as a kingdom, the soul as its king, and by the different senses and faculties constituting an army. So the soul, the body may be, if you look at the body as a kingdom, then the soul would be its king. And all of the other aspects and faculties of the body are like the army. Reason may be called the vizier or the prime minister, passion the revenue collector, and anger the police officer. Under the guise of collecting revenue, passion is continually prone to plunder its own account, while resentment is always inclined to harshness and extreme severity. Pardon me, alhamdulillah. That within our person, there are different aspects. We have passion, we have resentment. These are inherently evil, but they have to be kept within certain parameters. They have to be checked by our reason. Our reason leaves us and we follow our passion, anger, without any checks and balances from our reason. If you think about it, every crime, every problem people get into is always when either their passion or their anger takes hold of them too much. Neither is evil. We need both to be human, but not too much. A soul which allows its lower faculties to dominate the higher is as one who should hand over an angel to the power of a dog, or a Muslim, to the tyranny of an unbeliever. So a soul which allows anger or passion to dominate it, the cultivation of demonic, animal, or angelic qualities results in the production of corresponding characters, which on the day of judgment be manifested in visible shapes. The sensual appearing as a swine, a pig, the ferocious as dogs and wolves, the pure as angels. The aim of moral discipline is to purify the heart from the rust of passion and resentment until it is like a clear mirror and reflects the light of God. Someone may here object, but if man has been created with animal and demonic qualities, as well as angelic, how are we to know the latter constitute the real essence, while the former are merely accidental and transitory? Answer that the essence of every creature is to be sought in that which is highest to it and peculiar to it. Thus the horse and the donkey are both burden-bearing animals, but the superiority of the horse to the donkey consists in its being adapted for use in battle. If it fails in this, it becomes degraded to the rank of burden-bearing animals. Similarly with man, The highest faculty for him is reason, which fits him, for he leaves behind him all the tendencies to passion and resentment, and becomes animal qualities. Man is inferior to many animals, but reason makes him superior to them, as it is written in the Quran, so we have subjected all things in the earth. But if his lower tendencies have triumphed, after death, he will ever be looking towards the earth and longing for earthly delights. This is what causes dunya too much when they leave this world, because they're still attached to it. The Buddhists talk about this as well, attachment to the physical world, and pain and suffering. Manage that. We can't be totally detached because we're not angels. But at the same time, we can watch ourselves and we can do certain things which help us take a step back when we get too attached. And also, as Imam Al-Ghazali points out here, that if we look at our animal qualities, now I'm not a bodybuilder or anything like that, but if you look at someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime, when he was a young man and he was, he starred in that Terminator film and he was strong. But if you put him in the ring with a lion or a tiger in his prime, who do you think is going to have the better? Because he may be physically strong as a human, but he cannot run as fast or overpower a tiger. Physically, we are not that's not really our strength. If we were only physical animals without reason, we would never have become so successful as human beings have become to dominate the earth. This is through our minds, through our technology, through our science, even before we called it science. Learning that if we get a stick and we put a sharp power an animal that is much stronger than us, or if we use something similar that's smaller and put it into with a piece of wood that's bent a certain way with a string and fire it, we can overpower a lot of things, but not physically necessarily. In so many ways, animals are physically better than us. Crocodiles. Do you know crocodiles can survive so many diseases? Their blood contains like natural antibacteria, antiviral. If they get cut, they will survive. Whereas if we do, we will get straight away, we will get infections in there. They don't get it. Their blood is superior to ours. A lot of animals are physically. It was our rationality and our spirit that rose us above the animals. Abounds in marvels, both of knowledge and power. In a flash from earth to heaven and back again, can map out the sky. By it, he can also draw the fish from the sea and the birds from the air, and can subdue to his service the animals like the elephant, camel, and horse. His five senses are like five doors opening on the external world. But more wonderful than this, his heart is a window which opens on the unseen world of spirits. In the state of sleep, when the avenues of the senses are closed, this window is opened, and man receives impressions from the unseen world, and sometimes foreshadowings of the future. His heart is then like a mirror, which reflects what is pictured in the tablet of fate. But even in sleep, thoughts of worldly things dull this mirror, so that the impressions it receives are not clear. After death, however, such thoughts vanish, and things are seen in their naked reality. And the saying of the Quran, we have stripped the veil of our soul, we can also see clearly. This opening of a window in the heart towards the unseen also takes place in conditions approaching those of prophetic inspiration, when the intuitions spring up and the mind unconveyed through any channel. The more a man purifies himself from fleshy lusts and contemplates his mind on God, the more conscious he will be of such intuitions. Those who are not conscious have no right to deny their reality, nor are such intuitions confined only to those of the prophetic rank. Just as an iron, by sufficient polishing, can be made into a mirror, so any mind, by due discipline, can be rendered receptive of such impressions. So, iron, not steel, but iron, it rusts very easily. But Imam Al-Ghazali, if you polish it enough, it will look like a mirror, even iron. And the same is true of the heart. No matter how sinful a person is, no matter how, if they start to polish it, then it will change. Every child is born with a predisposition to, it was at this truth the Prophet hinted when he said, every child is born with a predisposition towards Islam. Then his parents make him a Jew or a Christian or a star worshipper, or Zoroastrian, I think he meant. Every human being has in the depths of his consciousness heard the question, am I not, i.e. God saying to us, if you reflect deeply, you will hear that, and answered yes to it. But some hearts are like so befouled with rust and dirt, they give no clear reflections, while those of the prophets and saints, though they are men with us, are that the soul of man holds the first rank among created things, but also by the power. Just as the angels preside over the elements, so does the soul rule the members of the body. Those souls which attain a special degree of power not only rule their own body, but those of others also. If they wish a man to recover, he recovers, or a person in health to fall ill, he becomes ill. Or if they will the presence of a person, he comes to them, or sorceries. These souls differ from common folk in three ways. One, while others only see in dreams, they see in their waking moments. While others' wills only affect their own bodies, these by willpower can move bodies extraneous to themselves. And three, the knowledge which others acquire by laborious learning comes to them, differentiate them from common people, but the only one within our cognizance, our understanding, or what we can see. Just as no one knows the real nature of God but God himself, so no one knows the real nature of a prophet except a prophet. Nor is it to be wondered at, as in everyday matters we see it is impossible to explain the charm of poetry to one whose ear is not susceptible to cadence and rhythm, or the glories of color to one who is stone blind. Besides more incapacity, there are other hindrances to the attainment of spiritual truth. One of these is externally acquired knowledge. To use a figure, the heart may be represented as a well, and the five senses as five streams, which are continually conveying water to that well. In order to find out the real contents of the heart, these streams must be stopped for a while, at any rate, and the refuge they have brought with them must be cleared out of the well. Leaves and soil and things like this, you have to filter that out of the water from the well. In other words, if we are to arrive at pure spiritual truth, we must put away for a time knowledge which has been acquired by external processes and which too often hardens into dogmatic prejudice. In modern terms, we call this bias. We all have bias. That bias from the way that we've been taught things. We have to filter out that bias. A mistake of the opposite kind is made by shallow people. Alchemy were to go around saying alchemy is better than in gold, and were to refuse gold when it was offered to them. Alchemy is better than gold, but real alchemists are very rare. Sorry. And so are real Sufis. This is a really important point that the Imam Al-Ghazali makes. A mistake of an opposite kind is made by shallow people who, echoing, repeating things which they've heard and misunderstood from Sufi teachers, go about criticizing all knowledge. I mean, I've seen this with some people. They will criticize everything, for instance, that Salafis say. Everything. But the Salafis are quoting from books of the Quran and Hadith. That doesn't mean everything they're saying is wrong. Some of it is correct. But the way they interpret, the way they understand it, no, I'm not saying that. But you can't criticize everything and say none of it has validity. Similarly, a lot of science. They criticize the modern world and developed than what our ancestors had. Because of that, we don't die routinely from typhoid and cholera and other horrible diseases. This is through the attainment of modern science. So we can't criticize all of that and say none of it has any validity. And so Imam Al-Ghazali, highlighting this point without elaborating on it too much, says this was the science where people could gold. Alchemists are very rare, and so are real Sufis. A lot of people who call themselves Sufis are not really Sufis. And they're usually the people that our enemies point to and say, look at these crazy people, look at what they're doing. I usually say, yeah, they're crazy people. That's not what we follow. But I can't deny their existence. Just like as Muslims, when people point to ISIS and Al-Qaeda and things like this and other crazy people, say there's nothing to do with me. I mean, I can't deny their existence. Anyone who will look into them, that was created. Lust delights in accomplishing desire. Anger delights in taking vengeance. The eye delights in seeing beautiful objects, and the ear in hearing harmonious sounds. The highest function of the soul of man is the perception of truth. Light. Even in trifling matters, such as learning chess, this holds good. And the higher the subject matter of the knowledge obtained, they like to discover the truth and be right. There's a reason for that. Have that characteristic, and why? A man may be pleased at being admitted into the confidence of a prime minister, but how much more if the king makes an intimate of him and discloses state secrets to him? An astronomer who by his knowledge can map the stars and describe their courses derives more pleasure from his knowledge than a chess player from his. Seeing then at nothing is higher than God, how great must be the delight which springs from true knowledge of God. A person in whom the desire for this knowledge is like one who has lost his appetite for healthy food, or who prefers feeding on clay to eating bread, does not die, and retains whatever knowledge of God it possesses. Indeed, it increases. An important part of our knowledge of God arises from the study and contemplation of our own bodies, which reveal to us the power, wisdom, and love of the Creator. His power in that from a mere drop, because we started as a little drop, he has built up this wonderful frame of man. His wisdom is revealed in his intricacies and the mutual adaptability of its parts. He is known by his not only supplying such organs as are absolutely necessary for existence. So God's love is shown by not only such organs as are absolutely necessary of lips. Man has or a little world in himself, and the structure of his body should be studied not only by those who wish to become doctors, but by those who wish to attain to a more intimate knowledge of God. Just as close study of entities and shades of language, body and its functions. The body may be compared to a steed, like an animal, and the soul to its rider. So a horse and its rider, you know. The body was created for the soul, and the soul for the body. If man knows not his own soul, which is nearest thing to him, what is the use of his claiming to know others? It is as if a beggar who has not the wherewithal for in his temporal sphere, he is the weakest of all things, being subject to hunger, thirst, heat, cold, and sorrow. Those things he takes most delight in are often the most injurious to him. And those things which benefit him are not to be obtained without toil and trouble. Intellect, a slight disarrangement of the matter in his brain is sufficient to destroy or madden him, to make us brain. As to his power, the sting of a wasp to rob him of ease and sleep. So some people think they're so powerful and stuff, but even a little wasp, if it stings you, it causes pain, causes suffering, but it's just a little insect. A person can be horrible inside, but be beautiful on the outside. Without frequent washing, he becomes utterly repulsive and disgraceful. In truth, man in this world is extremely weak and contemptible. It is only in the next that he will be of value. If, by means of the alchemy of happiness, he rises from the rank of the animals to the rank of the angels. Otherwise, his condition will be worse than the brutes, which perish and turn to dust. It is necessary for him, at the same time that he is conscious of his superiority as the climax of created things, to learn Alchemy of Happiness by Imam Al-Ghazali, which was, as I mentioned at the beginning, a summary that he produced for general distribution. This work, the Ihya Ulum Al-Din. If you can get hold of it, I haven't been online as much the past couple of weeks, but it's a holiday period here in the UK, and so I was spending more time with my family. I'm sure you understand that. But anyway, I hope to see you on Monday. I'll be back at the university on Monday. And then I will do my usual sohbet and Sufi meditation, inshallah. And if anybody is from the university who's listening to this now, I'll be there earlier in the day as well, if anybody needs to consult me on any matters, as sometimes happens. So I wish you all the very best. What's left of the weekend. And I wish you, if you're in the UK, It's a very good morning now. It's not a good evening, is it?